So about 9 or 10 years ago, I took on this project with an organization. It was they were based in Africa, and they were trying to do really good work for some folks over there that had just some difficult times, providing basic things like food and water and clothing and shelter to these folks. And I had the opportunity to kind of meet a gentleman, an older gentleman who was based just north of Dayton, had been working with them for something like 15 or 20 years. So he knew this organization really well. And he was really excited about being given the opportunity to kind of manage from their side the redesign of their website. And we had some really interesting constraints. As you can imagine, folks spread all over the continent there, trying to help folks get clean water, food, just basics. And the internet scenario, right, broadband, not exactly a great scenario for them. So we had some serious performance concerns that we had to think about. And I was just really excited about this. Every once in a while a project comes along where you get to do great work, but you get to do good in the world, And when those two things align, I think most people really kind of get engaged, And so our team was super excited. We jumped right into this thing. They had I think it was like a 2-month timeline, so we really had a lot to do in a short amount of time. And because of the time differences and just location challenge, distance challenge, we interacted solely with this older gentleman that I mentioned. And so over the course of this project, we went through what you would typically do. It was, we did a lot of discovery up front to try and understand the needs. We did some great prototyping throughout the process, cool design, got this thing built, implemented, and we were super excited. We got it live, met the deadline, met the budget, everything was great. And about 2 weeks after the site went live, I got a call from the guy who we had been working with this whole time, and he said, hey, I finally had a chance to show this to the rest of the team. And I was like, wait a second, are you telling me that we pushed this thing live and nobody else has seen this? And I'm starting to freak out a little bit, sweating. And he goes on to say, so the founders of this organization took a look at the site, and their feedback was that basically it's not really them. And it was like this awkward silence, And I was thinking to myself, how could that happen? About a month later, that site was down, and they had replaced it with default WordPress install with these really heavy images. Somebody wasn't even thinking about the performance. And I can remember that day when I refreshed. Every morning I was like, is this thing going to live? And it was gone. And that moment for me it's kind of a pivotal moment. I think back on that a lot. It's easy to think back about the projects that go great, but it's a little bit more difficult to think back and kind of analyze the ones that don't go so well. And when I think about that project in particular, what stands out to me is that a better JavaScript framework or a better design tool would not have helped, right? The code was good, the site was fast, the content was amazing. This was an expectation problem, right? Communication issue. And so when I think back on any of the projects that we've done where we've had any issues at all, it's always because of the people that are involved, And so I kind of had that sneaking suspicion because that's my experience. So I asked out on Twitter, I just put this out there. I said, hey, why have your web projects failed? Twitter's got this cool little poll thing you can do. So I gave folks 4 choices. I said, option 1, a developer framework. Option 2, you or your team. Option 3, a design tool. Or option 4, your boss or your stakeholders. And so I'm just curious here if you could respond for me. So a developer framework, think about any project you've had that failed because of a development framework. How about because of you or your team? Okay, all right. What about a design tool that failed, which caused your project to fail? Anybody? Okay, here's the big one. Boss, stakeholders, okay, all right. So I got the exact same kind of results. Basically, what I was trying to get at was that none of our projects fail because of the technical stuff, right? we're smart, we're very capable folks, we can solve the tech problems. But on the other hand, the people problems, right? That's the tough stuff. And so, I've been thinking about this a lot. And, I love this idea that our projects succeed or fail because of the people involved. And honestly, that's just true. There's so many humans that are involved in the work that we do every day, right? There's you and your team, your boss, the stakeholders, the users. I mean, so many folks. We have projects where there's a single individual who owns the whole company, had the original idea, and manages everything. And we've got projects on the exact opposite end of that spectrum where there's 50 people just in the UX team. It's like herding cats, I mean, so to try and get all those individuals to unify around a single idea and really do what humans can do, right? When we really kind of identify what's the core thing we're after. It's amazing. It's kind of unstoppable. And so we have all these humans involved, but I get frustrated with these negative ideas, right? Like that perhaps, projects are failing because of the people, right? So I was trying to think, what's a more positive spin on that? And this is kind of where I've landed, okay? So bear with me, tell me if you think this works. If we want to be better at our jobs, we got to be better people, right? Better humans. Would you agree with that general idea? Okay, I'm seeing some nods. It's okay if you don't, we can talk later. What I really think needs to happen is that our organizations need to be human-centered. And I think a human-centered culture is one that assumes sort of this underlying truth about us as individuals. And that is, if you imagine like back into middle school when you were studying ancient civilizations, or if you look at any sort of more modern sort of places where they're digging and finding these artifacts, they never find a scenario where there's just an individual that was always living on their own, right? A society of individuals. What we find is people grouped together, right? It's a small tribe, or it's a community, a city, an old town, right? And we come together because we need to help each other. and so this idea that we kind of recognize that, right? That we actually need each other to do our best work. That's what I mean by a human-centered culture. And I think there's this simple idea that valuable collaboration is at the core of that. So we're going to spend some time talking a little bit about this idea of collaboration. And I say specifically valuable because I think that, and I speak for myself as much as any other organization that I've worked with, but I think this is a problem, right? We mistake this idea of getting along for collaboration, when in fact they're very different things. So we're going to try to unpack that a little bit. For the Type A folks, here's your agenda. Little theory up front. Okay, I'm going to lay out for you sort of what I'm sort of kind of coming to understand as a framework for collaboration, a way for you to evaluate your team, the folks that you work with, okay? And then we're going to talk about how to develop those folks. We're going to talk about investing in humans. And then I'll give you a few ideas for things you could take back to work tomorrow, all right? So let's start with this idea of the ingredients. Now, in order to get at this, I thought it might be helpful to find a couple sort of very famous collaborations from human history. So here's the first. Anybody recognize these guys? Anybody seen this? Dumb and Dumber, right? Harry and Lloyd. Okay. So the first example is this idea of Dumb and Dumber. Now, if I was going to summarize this, it's okay if you haven't seen it. If I was going to summarize this movie for you, I would say two complete idiots bumble their way through a road trip and somehow manage to survive. That's literally the entire movie, okay? So if you haven't seen it, there you go. Now, I want to compare that. There's not a lot we can pull in terms of value out of Dumb and Dumber, so we need something to compare it to, okay? So the second movie I want to compare it to is this. Who's seen Moana? I have a 7-year-old girl who is obsessed with this movie. I've seen it probably more than most of you put together. So now if I was going to summarize this for you, I would say there are two very different characters, Moana on the left and Maui on the right, who initially dislike each other because of their differences. But eventually they realize they need each other to accomplish something that neither could do on their own. Now, this is ridiculously common in movies. If you've seen a romantic comedy, at the very beginning of the film, the love interests hate each other, always, right? That's always the case. They're forced to do a thing together, they're like put together in some scenario, and then they realize they need each other, they love each other. Same thing with the action movie, right? There's always this hero. They're a loner. They want to do this. They want to go solve this thing on their own. There's always the tag along, right? They have to bring this person with them. And what they end up finding out is that, hey, that person actually brought something to the table to solve this big problem that I couldn't have done on my own. So it's a really common theme. Now, I want to break down these just really quickly for us to get to some of that theory I was talking about. So let's take a look at each. In the case of Dumb and Dumber, Harry and Lloyd start out as best friends, right? And they are essentially the same person, okay? Like literally they say the same things, they complete each other's sentences. Now, they fight, they end up fighting over the love of a woman, and they go their separate ways, and they kind of fail independently. And by the end of the movie, they are back together, and they are best friends again, and they are essentially the same people as when the movie started, right? Okay, so now if we take a look at sort of a quick timeline for Moana, when this movie starts, these two characters first meet, they actually hate each other. They've got very different life experiences. They're coming to each other with they've just got a lot of differences. Now, over the course of the film, they're forced to struggle through something together. And then by the end of the film, I would consider them respectful collaborators. Okay. Now this is a little goofy, I get it. But we're just going to use this to kind of tease apart a couple ideas. And what I really want to focus in on are two key ingredients to what I would say is a valuable collaboration. The first of which is this: diversity of perspective. Okay? Now, certainly, I am not the first person to make this observation. If you go do any research on collaboration, on diversity in the workplace, what you're going to find is that every single one of them says increasing the number of perspectives, the unique ideas on a group that's going to collaborate always results in a better product in the end, always. So go do a little research on your own, find a few of these if you don't believe me. It's everywhere, okay? But I'm kind of a visual thinker. I would suspect that maybe a few of you are as well, so I like to chart things out. So I'm going to do this a few times for us. What I think is key about this, and why I think it's one of the key ingredients here, is that as you increase diversity of perspective, you're increasing the potential for valuable collaboration. Now, if you think about it, if you've got, in fact, some of the studies that I mentioned there have done this exact thing. But if you take 3 or 4 folks who have like deep knowledge on a very specific subject, and you put them at a table and you ask them to solve a problem about that subject, they're going to do a great job because they all know a lot, right? They've done the PhD thing. They understand sort of the area of field, the field of study. But if you take one of those folks and put them with 2 people who do completely different things and ask them to solve the same problem, generally they come up with a better solution. And they do that because they're not all just repeating the same things that they've been taught in school, right? These other 2 folks who don't know that field, like that PhD, they bring something unique, right? They challenge the norm. And so that diversity of perspective is what increases the potential for a really valuable collaboration. Does that make sense? All right, cool. The thing is that we need, in these examples, different life experiences, different genders, different ages, races, different points of view. In fact, we need dissenting points of view, okay? And we're going to talk a lot more about that. So the second key ingredient is this idea of empathy. And this is kind of overused in our field quite a bit, especially if you're in the UX. If you specialize in UX, like every talk in UX, it seems like they're always honing in on this. Now, I think this is the second key ingredient. And if you remember in the Moana and Maui example, where I said they were kind of forced to go and do a thing together, that little process where they're kind of stuck on a boat out in the ocean and they're trying to survive and not kill each other, essentially, that rough, kind of difficult process is actually what helps them develop a little bit of empathy for each other. And that's key. So if I was going to chart this one out, it would look something like this, right? As empathy increases, the ease of collaboration increases. So we're not talking about the potential value, we're talking about, is it possible for us to collaborate? If you think of empathy as your ability to see a situation from someone else's perspective, then empathy in a team becomes like the grease, right? For you to be able to actually set aside your differences and see the value that they bring that is unique. That make sense? Okay. So we got these 2 ideas, diversity of perspective and empathy. I told you I'm a visual thinker. So if we kind of chart these out, diversity of perspective increasing from left to right, empathy increasing from bottom to top, then we can use this as a very simple framework to take a look at our teams, to take a look at ourselves. And so I want to just kind of lay in here into these quadrants just a couple ideas for us to consider, all right? So on this left side, we've got what I would call just low value, right? Because we don't have a lot of diverse perspectives, the potential value for the collaboration is pretty low. Everybody's kind of thinking the same way, same life experiences, right? Now, the opposite of that on the right side is that there's a lot of potential value if we have a lot of different perspectives on the team. Make sense? Empathy is a little different. So if we think about this idea, I mentioned this, like increasing empathy increases the ease of collaboration. The reason that happens, I think, is because if you've got a scenario where there's not a lot of empathy, when folks are different than each other, those differences, those are the focus of our sort of observations, right? So we're looking at folks, we see that they're different from us, and we focus in on the personal differences, as opposed to a greater amount of empathy where we can focus on the conflict around ideas, which is that friction that we need to have really cool solutions emerge, right? So it's a shift from personal conflict to idea conflict, which is a healthy kind of conflict that we need. So now if we think about these quadrants, in the top left, I would call this indifference, right? So there's not a lot of conflict here because there's not a lot of diversity of perspective. It's okay to be different, but nobody is. In this bottom left quadrant, I would call this conformity. So because there's not a lot of empathy, people strongly question deviation from the norm. Even if you have a few folks with some unique perspectives, you probably don't know it, right? They're not really willing to speak up. Continuing over to the right, in the bottom right quadrant, I would call this fear to differ. This is actually pretty common. There's a lot of diverse perspectives here, but nobody's willing to hear another side, right? It's not worth sharing your unique perspective because it's simply shot down. And then that top right, this is courage to speak. And this is where great stuff can happen. This is where dissenting views are actually encouraged. This is where the best solutions emerge. So I want to pause just for a moment and let you think about this in terms of what's going to happen tomorrow morning when you go back to work, okay? Just imagine the folks you're going to sit down with and just for a moment consider where it is in this quadrant that you will be operating. So if we go back to sort of the Dumb and Dumber example and the Moana, the Maui Moana example, we can kind of like imagine sort of where they lie in this quadrant, okay? So bear with me, I know this is a little cheesy. So Dumb and Dumber starts in this bottom left quadrant, right? There's no diversity of perspective. These two are just both complete idiots. Over the course of the movie, maybe, this little struggle they go through, they gain a little bit of understanding for each other, slightly higher empathy. All right. Maui and Moana actually start in this bottom left too. Now, I didn't tell you about the very beginning of this movie, where she is actually living on this island with her people, and she's essentially the only one who has any different idea about what should be happening. But there's this crisis that they're facing, and everybody is just doing the same thing they've always done, and she's the only one who has another idea about how to solve it. So it's really, there's not a lot of diversity of thinking there. And then what happens is she kind of disappears to try and solve this thing, and these two meet. And very quickly, we're thrust into this bottom right quadrant, right? Tremendous amount of diversity of perspective. These two do not agree on anything, okay? And that's the focus of the rest of the film, essentially. And I mentioned this before, over the course of that movie, they're forced to do some crazy things, and they realize that neither of them could have solved those large problems on their own. They actually needed each other in order to do it. So it's really kind of cool to see those things progress through the story arc. Now, once you do this, right, with your team, if you can manage to kind of make your way into that top right quadrant, there's this simple idea that the team can own an idea. I love this concept. If you think about the opposite, so an individual owning an idea, really kind of what happens is that individual is ultimately responsible for it succeeding or for it failing. And that means all the other folks on the team are going to feel the need to ask permission just to make a suggestion, to make a change, right? They don't have that ownership. The opposite, where the team owns the idea. Every person is responsible for its success and its failure, and every person feels empowered to make changes and make suggestions and make it better. And that's a really healthy place to operate from. All right, so that's the theory. So now I want to talk a little bit about this idea of investing in your humans, the folks that you're surrounded by, okay? And again, you remember this idea, right? If we want to be better at our jobs, we've got to be better humans. In one sense, it's almost a little too simple, for us to like always just kind of come to this understanding. But we know how to help each other get better. It's actually not that hard to do. I'll share with you sort of the way that I think about that. And as we go through this stuff, a couple things. First of all, think about the folks that you're going to work with tomorrow, right? The folks you're going to be on Slack with or Skype, the people you're going to sit down around the table with, the people you're going to interact with. And as we go through this, think about how you could apply some of this to those relationships. And then secondly, my context is operating the organization Sparkbox in Dayton. I'm going to share a bunch of stuff about what we do, but that is not intended for, this is not me bragging about our company, okay? I don't want anybody to hear that, but that's just the only context that I have to operate out of. So that's kind of what I'm sharing from. I can tell you now, we do not have this stuff all figured out, all right? So if you have suggestions for me on things that we could be doing better, please come find me later, all right? So I want that caveat to be out there for you as we go. So the first way to sort of invest in the humans around you is this idea of investing in a skill. The second tier is kind of a little bit higher level, which is investing in the person. And then there's this third tier, which is investing in a life. We're going to kind of walk through each of these. The first is actually pretty common. Investing in a skill. If you imagine you've been hired at this new job because you're a really good programmer, and it makes a ton of sense for that organization to think, oh, this person is a great programmer. I'm going to continue to invest in her skill set, right? And so I'm going to send her off to this event, and she's going to go study Ruby on Rails. Okay, I'm going to send her here. She's going to study JavaScript, and we're going to just continue to pour into this young developer. Maybe she becomes a really amazing developer over time, right? That makes a ton of sense for the business because they're investing in the one little sliver of that person's brain that they hired her for. Make sense? So at Sparkbox, we love that idea. I always want my folks to be getting better at the thing that we're paying them to do. And so we do things like this. We encourage them to write and speak. I think writing is one of the best ways to get smarter. I think it makes you better at what you do because you have to formalize those ideas into something that helps people understand the nugget of knowledge that you've somehow learned. So writing makes you better. Speaking makes you smarter. You've got to really understand a topic. You've got to be able to defend it if people challenge you, right? So these two things really push us to become better at what we do. We also do this, I'm sure lots of folks do this, lunch and learn. We've got a little robot in Slack where if somebody does something throughout the week that you think, oh, that was kind of cool, I want to know how they did that. You can just use this little robot in Slack, say, hey, remind us later that this is a thing. And that person doesn't even know it yet maybe, but come lunch and learn time on Wednesday when you bring your lunch in, they're going to get called on to do a little mini kind of, here's what I learned, And that's super informal, and it's kind of, off the cuff, but it's a lot of fun, and it gives our people just a chance to help each other get a little better, right? We also do a thing called the Maker Series, and this just made like financial sense for us, right? Where over time, as your organization grows, it gets really expensive to send people out to all these crazy industry events. But what I learned is that you can call the exact same people who are speaking at an event apart or whatever event you want to go to and say, hey, would you mind coming to Dayton? I'm happy to pay you, and let's do a workshop with my team. And maybe some folks from the community will come and participate in that too. And the cost comparison is dramatically different. It's a much more affordable. And we get to spend a day with somebody who's shaping the industry in some way, right? So it's super simple to do. It doesn't take a tremendous amount of work, and it's really beneficial for the team. So it's just a few ways, and there's many, many more that you can, as an organization, help develop that little sliver of their brain, the skill set that you've hired them for. Now, investing in a person is a little different. If you kind of like take a step outside, right, and you think about the idea that when you hire somebody, they're going to bring some baggage with them into the job. They're going to have lots of different stresses from home, from friendships, from relationships. They're going to bring that with them. You can't ignore the fact that you've hired that whole person. And so we're looking for ways to try and say, you know what, I don't want to ignore that. In fact, all those things that make that person unique, that's the uniqueness that brings that diversity of perspective. So how do we help them as a whole person continue to get better, not just invest in that little sliver? So we're thinking a lot about this idea of wellness, right? This is pretty common too, but for me, I wasn't that healthy growing up, like I didn't eat that well. I loved pizza. I didn't know what to do in a gym. I literally never worked out before like 2 or 3 years ago. I just didn't know what to do, and I was afraid to go into a gym, literally, because I had no idea what was going on in there. There's all these dudes like in the mirror, and I was like, I don't know, that's not my scene, And so my business partner and I found this guy in Dayton, it's an awesome place called Present Tense Fitness, and he has this sort of holistic idea around fitness. He talks about eat well, sleep well, and get strong. And with those 3 kind of foundational ideas, I was able to kind of a bunch of sessions with him one-on-one in a gym where he would show me, this is what you need, this is how you construct a workout, this is what you need to do to get stronger. And this was so impactful for the 2 of us, my partner and I, that we just eventually said, this is something that we have to offer all of our people, because there's so many folks who are just afraid to go get stronger. They just don't know. They want to, but they don't know what to do. And so for us, like when you become an employee, you get a 5-week session one-on-one with this trainer to teach you about better food, better sleep, and how to get stronger. And it's been a huge deal for me personally, but also for a lot of our folks. We've had folks with carpal tunnel problems that are like, all that stuff it goes away if you just get stronger and eat better and get good rest. So this is huge, and this is investing in them as a whole person, right? Not just that little sliver of their brain. This peer review idea, and a lot of folks do these, right? Again, not a lot of this stuff isn't rocket science, but I thought when we introduced this concept that it would be over in that left column, right? That it would be people talking about, oh, your CSS kind of needs this, and you're not formatting whatever right, but it almost never lived in that column. What we're learning is that when we're willing to sort of kind of thicken our skin a little bit and become more transparent with each other and challenge each other, we find that there's a whole lot that we can do as individuals to be better communicators, to be better listeners, and all of those things make us better at our job. So this process happens every 6 months for us. Each person has to review a handful of folks that they work with. Rob and I, my business partner and I, are able to be reviewed anonymously. And then, just in the drive over here, I was talking with a few Sparkboxers, and we were talking about how that's not enough, right? Like just getting that feedback from folks is great, but what's next? And so we're talking about these ideas now about we need to be following up with those folks, and that there needs to be some accountability that we're actually getting better in those areas. And so anyway, we're still, like I said, we're still figuring that out. But this has been really cool. It's helped us to start to, really, like I said, thicken our skin, be okay with people critiquing what we do, and it's helping us to get better. And then we have a simple little thing called the threshold of empathy. I realized one day at lunch with one of our folks that he had this just kind of weird, he's totally like JavaScript developer, right? Hardcore dev guy, he's been with us for a long time. And we were just talking, and he was like, I've always kind of wondered, I'm just interested in the legal contracts that we sign. I was like, really? Because man, that is the least favorite part of my job, but we started talking, and he's like, I just don't know what happens there, would you be willing to, could I take a look at some of those? And I was like, heck yeah. So we created this little spreadsheet, and it's got all the people who work there down the left side, and then across the top, it's just a bunch of kind of tasks that most people don't ever get to do at Sparkbox, like review a contract, or help us write a proposal, or sit in on the very first call with a potential client, or I don't know, there's a dozen things there, right? And what we're looking for, it's not that I expect that this dev is going to start reviewing all the contracts for us, but him understanding what it takes to keep Sparkbox running is actually really good. right? That helps him understand that every decision we make has a ripple effect. Every decision as a designer that you make impacts the developers you're working with, and vice versa, right? So threshold of empathy, like how do we all reach a certain level of understanding about each other's tasks enough that we start to really benefit and think about the implications of the decisions we're making. So, we're early with this, but I think people are really enjoying this, and I never thought that people would really want to review the contracts, I was like, okay, let's review the contracts. So that's been cool. Now this last one, investing in a life, sort of takes it maybe one step further. So we talked about that little sliver of the brain that we've hired a person for. Obviously, we want to invest there. And then we're trying to recognize that we didn't just hire that sliver, right? We've got a whole person. How do we help develop that whole person? The idea of investing in a life is that that person has, a family, or they have friends. They have a group of individuals that they live with outside of work, right? They have hobbies. They have things that they're interested in. And so what we're trying to do with this is, I think it's a recognition that the things that we ask of an individual also have a ripple effect in their life, right? How many hours are we asking people to work? Are we asking them to travel? Things like that. And so we've started to introduce these little tiny programs. This one's called Travel Pizza. It's so simple. If I ask one of my developers to go to a conference and speak, if that young lady has a husband and kids, well, I'm also asking her to abandon her husband for a couple nights, right? And leave him with the kiddos. Okay, so what do we need to do in that situation? Well, one night, we would maybe call them and say, hey, we'd love to have pizza delivered to your place, right? It's not a huge deal. It's $20 to deliver a pizza, but it also removes just this burden, right? From somebody who's left at home while we've asked an employee to disappear and do a thing for us, over a couple days. So, lowest cost that you could ever imagine for a program at a company, this probably has the highest impact, right? The significant others, the kids, they recognize this. When they get a phone call from somebody at Sparkbox saying, hey, we'd love to buy you pizza while, Rob, your husband is out, or while your partner's out, they're just like, are you kidding me? Really? And it's very impactful. So simple things like this can make a big deal. We have a little vacation bonus where if you will agree to give us 1 month notice and you'll agree to take 5 days in a row off, we'll add $500 to your paycheck so you can go on vacation and actually take a real vacation, right? Get out of here and go recharge. Now, $500 for each individual. Honestly, it's not that much money, but it's enough to cover a couple airline tickets or an extra couple nights in a hotel. And the idea is the 1 month notice gives us better planning, right? So we can plan around the resource availability for clients. The $500 just helps them really get away and actually recharge. And the reason that we take vacation is because we need to separate ourselves every once in a while from the work we're doing, right? You can't stay in it all the time. You're not going to do your best work if you do. So it's just recognizing that. We also have a mandatory vacation policy. It's not unlimited, because if you look at the statistics, people with unlimited vacation almost never use it. So we have a mandatory policy where if you don't use all of it, we're going to count backwards from the end of the year and send you home. And that's literally, we've had to do it before. And that's because we want people to be intentional about this. You've got to take care of yourself. You've got to take care of your family. And then, other things, significant other dinners, my business partner and I and our wives will kind of get together with an employee and their significant other, and we'll just go out to dinner, and there's no announcement, it's just a dinner, and it's a chance to get to know them, to thank them, that significant other, for the time that we get from their partner in life, and that makes a big difference, Now, it's tempting, I'm sure, for all of you to take a picture of this and go back to your boss or whatever, say, hey, I got an idea. That's not at all what we're trying to do, okay? In fact, if you were to do that and you took this list back, I think even if your boss said, that's great, let's do it all, I think it would feel very inauthentic where you are, right? And that's because, these things, well, if you asked my employees about the culture, they would talk about these things, right? These are the things that would probably come to mind. But these things, what's important, I guess, to know is that these things are not your culture. Um, your culture starts, it has to start with the things that you believe, your values. And so the way that we as an organization have arrived at all of these little things is by identifying what's important, to us. Lifelong learning. I've got a whole company full of people who always want to get better at what they do. I love that about them, right? So that means they're going to write, and they're going to speak, and they're going to seek out opportunities to get better. This idea of being better, not just at our craft, but like all these things. I want to be better. I want to understand the implications of the decisions I'm making. And then this idea of community, that we're going to take care of each other, right? That's important. And so that is how you arrive at these kinds of things. If you were to read a business book about it, they would talk about operationalizing your values. I hate that word, but that's kind of what it is. You're taking your values and you're saying, what does this look like in real life? And what's cool about all this stuff is that there's sort of this ripple effect, right? Investing in a skill set, investing in a life is investing in that person. And investing in that person does make them better at their job. It does invest in their skill set, right? So all of these things result in us being better at what we do every day. And all of these things are designed to do this, right? To help us get up into that top right quadrant. We're talking about understanding each other better, developing more empathy for each other. Now, all of those things, understanding your values, identifying those, putting those into practice in some way, that's going to help develop a place that's welcoming to people who believe those same things that you do. But I will say that the idea of increasing the diversity of perspective on your team is a tricky one. There are no simple solutions to that. We've got a lot of issues in the industry as a whole to address. I can tell you a little bit about my personal journey, though. For me, this started a few years ago when I read this book. Has anybody heard of this? Alice Goffman was a student downtown Philly, and she was tutoring some young black women in school. And she decided, after getting to know them and their families, that she wanted to move down there. So she moved down there, and she spent 6 years living downtown in Philadelphia. And this book, called On the Run, Fugitive Life in an American City, is just her story, very matter-of-factly told about what life was like there for her. And I was reading this book, I was about halfway through it. This little moment, it's like this little scene from a movie in my mind. I was walking down this little town, down the street in this little town where I live. I have 2 kids. Both kids kind of got their hands, we're just walking. We come up to the corner, and this police car pulls up and stops. And my kids are like, "Dad, look, it's the police." And they waved. And the police officer leans over and is like, "Hi." He goes on his way. Like, normally, that's probably happened to me a dozen times in my life. But I was reading this book when that happened this time. And this book is about these little boys, little black boys, 10 years old. They're learning how to run from the police, right? Because they're afraid. Sorry, I get emotional about this because it's a serious problem, And in that moment, it kind of made me realize that there's a whole set of experiences out there that are so different than mine. And I hate it that this is happening, but it's true, and it's happening in Columbus, and it's happening in Dayton, and we have to do something about it, right? This is a real problem. This made me question myself, right? It made me examine my life and start to try and understand what's happening in this industry, and how do we build a place that's truly inclusive, where people are valued for just being a human, right? That is so important to us. This is a personal journey, right? This is how it started for me. It maybe will start somewhere else for you. Maybe you're further along than I am. Then I hope that that's true. The next step for me was this. So if you haven't done this, you can do this in 15 minutes, all right? Just Google implicit bias test Harvard, and you'll find these. They're free to take, and they will, you cannot trick these tests, I promise you, because I thought I could. But go spend 15 minutes, spend a half an hour, and take a few of these, okay? They're gonna challenge you. They're gonna make you see that you have bias that you have got to address as an individual. And until all of us recognize that, we're just not gonna be willing to see it, okay? Make sense? Sorry, This is important stuff for us, and I feel like it doesn't happen. It's not going to happen because your boss says that diversity is important. That's not enough, right? It's got to happen at the individual level. And so go read a book. Go read some stuff that challenges the way you think, okay? Okay, sorry. What to do? So I just want to close with a few ideas. I kind of mentioned this, hinted at this earlier, but this idea of hiring the whole person. We got to stop thinking about the people we hire as just a set of skills, right? Recognize that they're coming in with baggage, they're coming in with a lot of cool experiences. It's important for us to recognize that and help develop that whole person. I would say food is incredibly powerful, right? Food can break down barriers like nothing else, and our culture is pretty hardly centered around food. We cook every Friday. We make a big Thanksgiving meal on Thanksgiving. We even have Halfsgiving, where we practice making Thanksgiving meal. Okay, I mean, we love to eat. Okay, so there's something legit about food. So if you have people, like a group of folks that you want to get to know better, share a meal. It goes a long way. In terms of what an organization can do around diversity, I love this simple idea from Leslie Miley. This is from Tech Inclusion last year. He said, when you go to cities that have diverse populations, you can hire people who are diverse because that's who's in the community. And then those people will come back to your headquarters and hire people who look like them because that's who's in their networks. And it's just deceptively simple, right? Stop and asking people to come to you and start going to them and helping them. Invest in what they're doing. I think in the meetup community especially, like we've got like a dozen meetups in Dayton, Ohio, you know? And it's like they're all competing, and I just like, people, like let's just like help each other out, and we can like maybe instead of like spreading like a dozen people at each one, we'd have 150 like we do here. It's great. Anyway, invest in those communities, right? It's gonna help you develop those networks. I would encourage you to expose disagreement. I think a lot of people who are in charge at companies are afraid of disagreement. They just want people to just get along and kind of do their thing. But disagreement is key if you're going to do good work. You got to have it. I mean, it's actually probably the most important part of you having real, truly valuable collaboration. You've got to not only expose it, you've got to model it, right? My business partner and I share an office, and we're pretty good at arguing, right? Not in a bad way, but we get to the heart of a problem very quickly because we just are willing to like go back and forth, and that dissenting idea, disagreement, is what helps us do our job. Even beyond that, I would say you have to encourage participation from folks who are a little less outspoken. It's not their fault if they're not willing to speak up. It's probably because somebody has spoken over them way too many times, right? So you need to stand up and say, hey, I would love to hear what you have to think about this, very explicitly. Maybe that means that you got to speak a little less and listen a little more, right? Sometimes our voices are the ones that are too loud. I would also just kind of say this, that we are, and I mean, by we, I mean people who do web stuff, right? We're scrappy. I love this about this industry. I mean, we're so young, you know, the web is 20 some years old, right? 30 years old. That means that when it started, there was no program for you to study. There was no degree to get. If I ask at Sparkbox, what did you study? You know, I've got English majors, biology majors. I've got some computer science folks. I've got people who didn't go to college. It's great. Lots of different perspectives because they didn't study the same stinking thing. But this is changing for our industry, right? We've got boot camps. We've got web design and development programs now in schools. This is going to flood our industry with people who are cookie cutter, education-based folks who have studied the exact same things, right? So we have to push back against that. That's fine. It's great to go and study. I'm not telling you not to. But we've got to be ready for the impact that that's going to have. We're going to lose that scrappiness, right? So we got to be intentional about keeping it. And I would just challenge you finally with this last idea. I think our greatest threat to valuable collaboration is our lack of diversity. The more I try to understand this, the more I keep coming back to this idea. I feel like if, as an industry, if we can realize that losing our egos and allowing our teams to own an idea produces better work, then we're going to be well on our way to many more successful collaborations. Thanks for your time. Thank you. Do we have any time for, we do? Okay. All right, I'm happy to chat if folks have questions or dissenting views. Hey, that's all right.
That was exactly 45 minutes and 5 seconds.
Nailed it.
5 seconds.
All right.
Okay, questions.
Oh yeah, so we do have 5 shirts from Smartbox. Hopefully they're your size.
Question encouragement.
There's a couple different sizes there. So, yeah, what's up, man? Take the mic real quick too.
I like the perspective of hiring a person and hiring everything about that person.
Yeah.
Hi, how are you? I like the idea of hiring a person and hiring everything about that person.
Yeah.
But clients also come with baggage.
Yeah.
So how do you get to know a client to the point where you can accept all the complexity that comes with them?
That's great. Awesome question. Thank you. I feel like part of that depends on the business model, right? So if you're the kind of organization that is like quick, kind of one and done, build a thing and then disappear, you're probably not going to have time, right? For us, it's a little different. I think we're more involved. We try to be, not always, but we try to be more involved with them over a very long period of time. We've got customers we've been working with for 7 years. About 75% of our projects year over year are repeat business. And so that's how we do it. It's time, right? It's being in the trenches together. We also have sort of a pretty involved discovery process that we go through, which is a little painful, but that's kind of what you need to get at some of that stuff. Happy to talk later, about some other ideas too, but awesome question. Thank you. Anyone else?
And we are recording, so when you ask a question, please.
Use the mics.
If you have an employee that doesn't want to write and speak, or they have an aversion to the wellness budget and they don't want to participate, how do you respond to that person when you want to build this culture, but they're not buying into it? Do you have that, or do you kind of hire talking about those things that you're going to require of them further down the line? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, awesome question. We definitely, we're pretty vocal about those things up front. But it's okay if somebody doesn't want to write or if somebody doesn't want to speak. How else are they going to? It's about, like, the reason we do that is so that they're intentionally investing back in themselves on things that they're learning, right? So we have folks who don't like to write, they don't speak, but maybe they love to do side projects, That's okay too. So I said it's encouraged, it's not necessarily mandatory, although if it was just me, I might say the writing part is mandatory. But that's a little, I don't like that idea, but I just, I believe that writing makes us so much smarter. I don't publish half the things that I write, but getting them down, the process of putting those words, just getting them out of my head, it's just like helps me be able to talk about a thing intelligently. So if you're not doing that, please start, even if nobody ever sees it, right? We talk about the idea that because there's a lot of fear about writing and speaking. Like every person who speaks will tell you that they have imposter syndrome, which is this idea that they're going to be found out for not actually knowing the thing, right? Like everybody who's got imposter syndrome. Okay, look around and see all these people got it too, right? It's not just you. We all struggle with that. The truth is that you're right, there's always somebody better, but there's also always somebody a little further behind. And that doesn't work unless you're playing that role in the middle, right? Where you're sharing about the things that you're learning. It's okay if somebody else does it better. That's okay, right? So that's kind of how we try to encourage folks to participate in those things. The wellness budget, we've had one person so far who chose not to do the training stuff. There's also a sort of a matching budget where they can spend it on anything that they want to help them eat better, sleep better, or get stronger. So that's like gym memberships or yoga, whatever. Hey.
Do you have a specific hiring process? Like, how do you actually hire people?
Yeah. We have a few things. Thanks for the question. We we run an apprenticeship program every year. So we take applications. We're going to start taking applications very soon here in the next few weeks. But we take applications at the end of every year, and then we select between 2 and 4 folks to come, move to Dayton, and be an apprentice at Sparkbox. That's a 6-month process. We've got a whole curriculum that we've developed. It's a paid position, but you're just paid to learn, to be in the office and learn. That gives people who don't want to speak, maybe in this kind of setting, an opportunity still to teach, maybe in a more one-on-one situation. So, like I said, speaking, teaching makes you smarter. That helps develop our team. So we have hired at least one person out of every apprentice class that we have, which is a great way to get junior developers. We also tend to, smart people know other smart people. So that's like the first thing that we would do is say to the team, hey, we're looking for 2 JavaScript developers, which we are, by the way. And then those folks, can reach out to their networks. The other thing is, like, we write a lot, we speak a lot, we do a lot of workshops. So we're in scenarios where we just get to know people in the industry. And the best advice that I was ever given about hiring is to be very explicit about your values, because if you are hiring people based on those values, then they're gonna be a good fit for you as an organization, right? They believe the same things. And that also steers you away from the idea of just hiring folks that you would go have a beer with, which is gonna create a monoculture, right? So, values, gotta start with values. I don't know where that mic went, so.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm curious how long your theory has been in practice, and in what ways have you come up with to kind of measure your return on investment from your theory of how to manage your employees?
So the theory around investing in humans?
Yes.
Okay, awesome question, thank you. So it didn't start as like a nice formalized 3 tiers of whatever, it never does, right? So it's been more of sort of a retrospective look at what has happened organically for us. And it took me probably about a year of thinking about, like, what is it that we're doing? Like, why are we choosing to do the things that we're doing, and how are those impacting our people, there's like 7 other iterations of all those diagrams that didn't really capture it well. So I would say we've been doing those kinds of things for a very long time. We started in 2009, so not too long. We're still young. But since then, we've been trying to do those kinds of things, and they have slowly grown and evolved over time. And this is sort of the best representation that I have been able to put together of what it is and why we've chosen, to do those things. So I don't know if I directly answered that, but I'm happy to talk later if I didn't. Okay. Anybody else? We'll get one up here for you, I promise.
Hi, Ben.
Hey.
I don't want to dwell on the negative,
Yeah.
but if you had like the top 5 most repetitive bad habits that you've seen either in the industry or within your staff, what would those be?
Wow. Top 5 bad habits. I mean, I don't know if it's a habit, but I kind of hinted at this idea of like mistaking, getting along for collaboration. Those things are really very different. I tried to kind of call that out, but it's really easy to get along with people if they're just like you, right? You have so many things in common. It's not so easy to get along with people who just have different worldviews or a different perspective on things. And I think that it's not easy, to push through those differences, but it's the only way to get better, I think. So that's only one. We should have a beer later. Thanks, though, for the question. Okay, just 2 more questions right here. This guy's been patient, so. Hi.
Thanks for taking my question.
Yeah.
So it's a 2-tier question.
Okay.
The first one is, after you started implementing all these investing in your humans strategies, have you noticed any negative side effects, like you killing off intrinsic motivation, stuff like that? And the second level to the question is, what's a good way to present all these perks and bonuses in a non-condescending, helpful way?
Ask the last one again. Sorry.
So like, for example, my friend works in a brewery, and they pay them like $50 if they can read a book within a week.
Yeah.
At that level, I think it's okay, but I can see how it might come across the wrong way. So just any general advice, not like a specific question.
Man, you people have good questions. Stump the chump, right? Goodness. In terms of, so the first one was about, I'm sorry, negative.
Do you see any
negative repercussions? Is that what you're? Yeah, there's a lot of folks, I think, who see the idea of like collaboration as not always like the best way to approach a problem. There's actually a lot of science around this, where sometimes the type of task that is really a task that an individual should do. So it's not that we don't ever let folks work on their own. There's plenty of time for them to put their headphones on and write that code or do that design work or whatever it is. I think what's most interesting to me is, with our customers, like if I had it my way, I would literally just lock them in a room with my team and not let them out until the project was done. Like, honestly, we would have such great work if we just did that, right? Nobody's willing to do that, obviously, but man, we would like solve those problems, right? And it's because we would bring expertise around the technology, around the process, and they would bring expertise around their industry and their customers, and it's all those different, that's what we need, right? We can't disappear and do the work and come back and have it be good, because we need their knowledge, their input. So it's that sort of collaborative kind of mindset that I'm thinking of. I will tell you that the conversation around diversity and inclusivity is tough. We have a channel, it's in Slack, called Equal, and the intent there was just to put stuff in there that really challenges our perspectives. And sometimes some stuff gets put in there and people are not happy about it, very different perspectives. And, we were just talking on the drive over again about the risk of having that channel for us, And I think, Brian said this on that drive to me just a moment ago. He said, I think that the potential value of giving people a place to have those conversations far outweighs any risk that we face as a company. So I'm sure that there are some negatives that come with this. I think what I'm learning is that I'm not afraid of that. I want some of that friction because I think that's healthy. So again, I don't know if I fully answered, but I'm happy to talk more later. Last one, right? Hi. Yeah. So thanks. Yeah. Is the question around? Yeah.
Is it working now?
Hey, all right.
Oh, yeah. So let's say you're an individual contributor. You're not a leader of people.
Yeah.
And you still want to establish this human-centered culture by working with your stakeholders.
Yes.
So you don't have a lot of control over your environment.
Right. Yeah. Awesome question. Thank you. And actually, every time that I've talked about these things, somebody asks something very similar. They'll say, hey, I don't make hiring decisions, or I'm not the manager. I have no say in the programs that we put in place. I would actually kind of push back a little bit, and I would say, hey, your stakeholders have to eat lunch, right? Food, right? Sit down with them, have a meal, get to know them. What if somebody's traveling and there's no program to buy their family pizza? Well, do you have an extra $20? Maybe you can deliver that to them, right? Those simple little gestures of you taking that first step, that opens the door for the potential relationship to grow. And the idea again is it's that empathy thing. It's like, how do I get to know what this person is actually dealing with so that I can understand how my decisions are impacting them? Because if you have stakeholders that are counting on you to deliver a thing, all of your decisions, they literally have a stake in what you're doing, right? They should care. And getting to know them, getting to know what actually is important to them is so much better than just a list of requirements or something from them, you know? I feel like I'm falling short on all of these, but that's all that's coming to mind right now. So we can talk later too, okay? I think that's it. Yeah? Thank you, everybody.